There's an ancient story that humanity has been telling for millennia, a story about a man named Job. They say it was a test of faith. They say it was a divine trial. But what if I told you there's another way to look at this story, a way that freezes your blood and makes you question everything you think you know about heaven, hell, and what lies beyond our understanding? What if Job's suffering wasn't a job, was perfect? Not in the sense of being without flaws, but perfect in his human condition. Rich, prosperous, righteous, 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys. An empire built with his own hands. But more than that, he was a man who feared God and turned away from evil, blameless. The scriptures say, "There was no one like him on all the earth." And that's exactly what caught the attention. In the celestial courts, where angels present themselves before the throne, where decisions that shape destinies are made in absolute silence, something happened that should never have happened. The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and among them, walking as if he belonged in that place, was Satan. Now stop for a moment. Think about this. The adversary of all creation, the accuser, the destroyer, walking freely in the courts of heaven. God asks where he's coming from, and the answer is simple, almost casual. From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it, like a predator studying its territory, like a scientist observing his laboratory. And then God asks a question that changes everything. Have you considered my servant Job? Why that question? Why, of all the humans on earth, does God specifically point to Job? Why not let Satan continue his walk? Why draw attention to the most righteous man on earth? Satan's answer is cold, calculated, almost scientific. Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. It's a hypothesis, a theory to be tested. And God, the creator of the universe, responds, "Everything he has is in your hands." Permission granted, the experiment can begin. Job was in his house when the news arrived, one after another, like waves crashing against rocks, each one destroying a piece of his life. First messenger, the Sabaeans attacked, hadn't even finished breathing when the fourth came running, with empty eyes. The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, attacked the camels, killed all the servants, took the oxen and donkeys, killed the servants with the sword. While he was still speaking, the second arrives. Fire of God fell from heaven, burned the sheep and shepherds, all dead. The third messenger. In minutes, an empire was reduced to ashes. Generations of work, of sweat, of building, simply erased from existence. But the last messenger brought something worse than the loss of property. He brought the end of everything that truly mattered. Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. 10 children, 10 lives, all dead in a single moment, crushed under the weight of stone and wood, their laughter interrupted by a wind that wasn't natural. Their last breaths taken while they were celebrating, while they were living, while they were happy. Job tore his robe, shaved his head, and then, in an act that defies all human logic, he fell to the ground and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Phase 1 of the experiment failure. The subject didn't break. Back in the celestial courts, Satan appears again, and God once more asks about Job. He still maintains his integrity. But the adversary doesn't give up. He refines his hypothesis. Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. And God responds, "He is in your hands, but you must spare his life." Think about the meaning of these words. Spare his life. Everything except death was authorized. Every form of suffering, every agony, every physical and mental torture that a human body can endure before finally surrendering to death. All of this was permitted. Job woke up covered in sores. Not small wounds or mild rashes, painful sores covering his entire body, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. The pain was constant, incessant, as if 1,000 burning needles pierced his skin simultaneously. He took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself, trying to relieve the suffering, sitting among the ashes of what was once his life. His wife, the woman who shared his days of glory, looked at him with a mixture of pity and despair, and said the words that echo through the centuries. "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." She wasn't being cruel. She was being practical, merciful even. Why prolong the suffering? Why cling to faith when faith has only brought destruction? Better to end it now. Better to release yourself from the agony. But Job answered, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" 3 friends came to visit him, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. When they saw him from a distance, they didn't recognize him. The man sitting in the ashes, covered in sores, didn't look human. They tore their robes, wept aloud, threw dust on their heads, and then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word, because they saw that his suffering was too great for words. But after 7 days the silence was broken, and what came from Job's mouth wasn't praise. It was a cry of anguish that tears the veil between the human and the divine. "May the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, 'A boy is born.' That day may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine upon it." Job cursed his own existence, wished he had never been born, asked why light is given to those who suffer, why life is granted to those who desire death more than hidden treasures. And his friends, one by one, began to speak, offering explanations, building theological arguments. Surely Job had sinned. Surely there was some hidden fault. God doesn't punish the innocent. This pain must have a reason. You must have done something to deserve this. 29 chapters of argumentation, of veiled accusations, of elaborate theodicy trying to justify the unjustifiable. 3 cycles of speeches, each more desperate than the last, trying to fit Job's suffering into a box that makes sense. But Job doesn't accept it. He cries out for answers. He demands judgment. "Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead, or engraved in rock forever." He wants his testimony to remain, for his story to be told, for someone, somewhere in the distant future, to know that he existed and suffered and didn't know why. And then God responds, not with explanations, not with comfort, but with questions, questions that destroy any pretense of human understanding. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Question after question, a cosmic bombardment of perspective. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loosen the cords of Orion? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Do you give the horse his strength, or clothe his neck with a flowing mane? Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom? But the most disturbing questions come last. God describes 2 creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan, primordial monsters of unimaginable power. And about Leviathan, God says something that freezes the soul. Who can open the doors of his mouth, ringed about with his fearsome teeth? His snorting throws out flashes of light, smoke pours from his nostrils, his breath sets coals ablaze, flames dart from his mouth. And then the final question. No one is fierce enough to rouse him. Who then is able to stand against me? Do you understand what's being said here? There are forces in this creation that humanity cannot comprehend, cannot control, cannot even look at directly. And if even these creatures are under God's dominion, what right does a human have to question divine methods? Job falls silent, humbled but not answered. I am unworthy, how can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. And here's the part no one likes to mention. God never explains why, never reveals that there was a conversation in the celestial courts, never mentions Satan, never tells Job that his suffering had a reason, a purpose, an experimental objective. Job dies without knowing the truth, without understanding that he was the variable in a cosmic equation, a subject in an experiment about the nature of faith. The story ends with restoration. God gives Job twice as much as he had before, 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 donkeys. He has 10 more children and lives 140 years, seeing 4 generations of descendants. But think about the first 10 children. They didn't come back. They weren't resurrected. They didn't get a second chance. Their lives were extinguished like candles in a gale to prove a point, to test a hypothesis, to satisfy a question about the nature of human devotion. And the servants who died defending Job's property, and the wives and children of those servants, and everyone whose lives were destroyed in the periphery of this story, collateral damage in a divine experiment. The story of Job raises a question that crosses millennia and still has no satisfactory answer. When powers beyond our comprehension decide to use human lives to prove philosophical arguments, what does that say about the nature of cosmic justice? When suffering is permitted not because it was deserved, but because someone needs to prove that faith can survive complete destruction, what does that reveal about the value placed on human experience? Job maintained his integrity. He passed the test. The experiment was successfully concluded. Satan's hypothesis was refuted. Case closed. Data collected. Conclusion documented for eternity. But Job never knew he was in an experiment. He suffered in complete darkness, not knowing there were observers noting his reactions, measuring his responses, recording each scream of agony as evidence in a cosmic debate. And if there's a lesson here, perhaps it's this: you might be an experiment too. Your suffering, your losses, your nights screaming into the void, begging for answers that don't come, might have nothing to do with your actions, might not be punishment, might not be a test of character, might simply be the necessary variables in questions you'll never know are being asked. Maybe faith isn't about understanding. Maybe it's about continuing to exist when all logic says you should give up. Maybe it's about maintaining your humanity when forces beyond comprehension try to reduce you to a data point. Job rose from the ashes, rebuilt his life, had more children, though none could replace those who were lost. Prospered again, though the scars never completely disappeared. And somewhere, in the celestial courts where decisions are made and experiments are conducted, his story was recorded as proof that human faith can survive literally anything. Except Job isn't special. Job is you, is your neighbor, is every person who has ever suffered without apparent reason, who lost without justification, who screamed to the sky and only heard silence in response. Job's story doesn't answer the question of suffering. It amplifies it. It takes our discomfort with cosmic injustice and transforms it into sacred text. It immortalizes the moment when a man realized there are no satisfying answers, only the choice to continue or give up. And the most disturbing part? God, in the end, rebukes Job's friends for trying to explain his suffering, for trying to make sense of what happened, for constructing elaborate theologies to justify the unjustifiable. God says they didn't speak correctly about him. But Job, who questioned, who screamed, who demanded answers, who cursed the day he was born, Job spoke correctly. Brutal honesty in the face of inexplicable suffering is more acceptable than false explanations that try to make pain seem just. So when you're in the ashes of your own life, scraping your wounds with broken pottery, surrounded by people who say there must be a reason, remember, Job had no reason. He had integrity, And in the end, when the universe stopped torturing him, when the experiment was concluded, when the data was collected and archived, he was still standing. Maybe faith isn't about understanding cosmic experiments. Maybe it's simply about refusing to be destroyed by them, about maintaining your humanity when everything conspires to rob it, about continuing to be yourself when incomprehensible forces try to reduce you to nothing. Job's story doesn't end with answers. It ends with survival. And maybe in the end, that's what we're all doing here. Surviving experiments whose purpose we'll never fully comprehend, maintaining our integrity in a universe that seems determined to test it to the breaking point. Job survived. The question that remains is, can you?